My parents exiled me at 16 and walked into my law office begging me to save my brother Reddit stories. 13 years after cutting me off, they returned with desperation written on their faces. What followed forced them to confront the consequences they never thought would find them. Hi, I'm Daniel, 29, and the day my parents walked into my law office begging me to save my brother, they had no idea they were talking to the same kid they exiled at 16 without a phone, a plan, or a shred of parental dignity. The look on their faces? Once-in-a-lifetime cinema. But before we get to that moment, the one I replay in my head like a personal highlight reel, we need to rewind to the night everything went off the rails. I was 16, exhausted from a late shift at the grocery store, and asleep when my parents tore out of the house at 2 a.m. I didn't know it yet, but Jackson, my 14-year-old brother and lifelong golden child, had just been arrested for breaking into our high school with his group of delinquent friends. Spray paint, vandalism, attempted computer access, the full idiot package. They came home at dawn, Mom sobbing, Dad furious, Jackson crying like a kid who finally realized consequences were real. I braced for a normal conversation. Instead, I got cast as the villain. According to my parents, the reason Jackson broke into the school wasn't that he was hanging out with a kid on probation, or that he'd been collecting red flags like Pokemon cards. No. It was because I was a bad influence. Hi, the honor roll student with a job. Hi, the kid who warned them about Jackson's friends for months. Hi, the one who, apparently, had driven him to crime by creating too much pressure. It would have been hilarious if it weren't so deranged. Then came the sentence. I was being shipped off to Aunt Julie and Uncle Robert in Pennsylvania. No phone. No contact with friends. No discussion. Jackson got house arrest and sympathy cake. I got banishment. My dad actually said, "You need time away to reflect on the damage you've caused." I remember staring at him and thinking, "You people don't need therapy, you need a documentary series." But I didn't scream. Didn't beg. Didn't argue. At 16, I just packed a bag and left. Little did they know they were sending me into the very crucible that would forge the eternity they'd one day come crawling to. And oh man, that day was worth the wait. The 6-hour drive to Pennsylvania was the quietest car ride of my life. My dad didn't turn on the radio. Didn't speak. Didn't even look at me. You'd think he was transporting a felon, not a kid who came home from his shift and went to bed. When we finally pulled into Aunt Julie and Uncle Robert's driveway, a small yellow house with an overgrown garden, my dad handed my aunt a manila folder like he was signing over ownership of a used appliance. School records. Medical forms. Instructions. Then he turned to me, gave me that awkward half-hug people reserve for coworkers they barely tolerate, and said, "Use this time to think about what you've done." What I had done. Right. My aunt and uncle were kind, but they were clearly confused by the entire situation. Julie hugged me and whispered, "We're happy to have you here, sweetheart." But even she couldn't mask the concern in her voice. Robert just gave me a nod, the kind that says, "We'll figure this out." Inside the guest room, my new home, I sat on the bed, staring at the blank walls. No phone. No laptop. No way to talk to my friends, or even tell my job I wasn't coming back. My parents had made certain of that. They wanted me invisible, offline, erased. The next morning, my aunt explained the rules. My parents wanted limited contact. No phone calls unless absolutely necessary. Internet use only for schoolwork. No social media. No distractions. In their words, I needed to focus on becoming a better brother. Translation. Sit in this room and marinate in the guilt we manufactured for you. But something unexpected happened. The silence, the isolation, didn't break me. It sharpened me. With nothing else to do, I poured myself into school. Studied like it was a sport. Read ahead in every class. Took meticulous notes. Built GPA armor. I joined debate because it didn't require a social circle, just a brain and the ability to argue without crying. A skill that would later become my entire career. I volunteered at the library. Not for fun. For college applications. And slowly, a strange realization formed. Being thrown away had freed me. There was no Jackson to overshadow me. No parents to criticize me. No impossible standards to dodge. Just me. And the fire they accidentally lit under me. While they were home coddling their golden child, I was reinventing myself, one AP class, one debate round, one quiet night of studying at a time. And when my aunt finally told me, hesitantly, "Your parents want to know when you'll come home for a visit," I surprised both of us by saying, "I'm not ready." But the truth was simpler. I didn't want to go back. Not then. Maybe not ever. I was done being the family scapegoat. I was becoming something else. And they had no idea. Senior year, something inside me flipped from surviving to building. It was subtle at first, a shift in posture, the way I carried my books, the way I answered questions in class. Teachers noticed. My aunt noticed. Even I noticed, though I pretended not to. But the biggest turning point came in the form of a single conversation. It was November, cold enough that Aunt Julie insisted everyone wear 2 layers even inside. I was at the kitchen table, surrounded by flashcards and SAT prep books, when Uncle Robert sat down across from me with the kind of serious face you only see on adults who are about to talk about emotions. "You doing all right, kid?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said, the automatic lie teenagers deploy like armor. He didn't buy it. He'd worked construction for 40 years. You don't survive that long without recognizing structural cracks. "You know," he said, "what your parents did? Sending you here? That wasn't about you." I froze. He continued. "They were drowning back home, and instead of teaching Jackson how to swim, they threw you overboard to lighten the load." It was the first time anyone, in my family had said out loud what I'd known deep down but hadn't dared to name. He wasn't done. "And I'll tell you something else, you're not going back there. Not the way they think. Not as their scapegoat. You've got too much potential to waste it in that house." That cracked something open inside me. The anger I'd buried? The hurt? The resentment? It didn't explode. It aligned. For the first time, my pain had a direction. That same week, my guidance counselor pulled me aside after class and said, "You ever think about pre-law? You argue like someone who enjoys winning." It was meant as a light comment. I treated it like prophecy. 2 months later, I applied early decision to a state university with a strong pre-law track. I got in. The acceptance letter wasn't just validation, it was liberation. Proof that every lonely lunch, every silent night, every hour of studying while Jackson partied back home, had been building to something. My parents found out third hand through Aunt Julie. Their response? A card. A generic Hallmark card that said, "Congrats on your next chapter," with no handwritten note inside. Just their signatures. That was the moment I understood fully. I didn't need them. Not for money. Not for approval. Not for identity. I wasn't the son they threw away. I was the son who walked away. And I knew that one day, I'd face them again. Not as a forgotten kid. But as someone they'd need. Someone they'd underestimated. Someone they could no longer control. I just didn't know that day would come in the form of my secretary knocking on my office door 13 years later saying, "You have a walk-in consultation, a Mr. and Mrs. Stevens." And I had no idea what was about to walk into my office. But we'll get there. College was liberation disguised as exhaustion. I juggled classes, 2 part-time jobs, work-study hours, and a schedule that would have made most freshmen cry into their ramen. But I didn't care. Hard work didn't intimidate me, it focused me. I graduated undergrad with honors and an acceptance letter to law school. No celebration from my parents. No calls. No. "We're proud of you." Aunt Julie and Uncle Robert, though? They drove 8 hours just to take me out for dinner. Law school was a different beast entirely. Tough. Competitive. Brutal in ways only people who've survived it truly understand. But unlike the kids who collapsed under the Socratic method or had panic attacks in the library at 3 a.m., I had one advantage. I'd already learned how to survive alone at 16. No professor could intimidate me more than my own parents had. Juvenile justice clicked for me almost immediately. Every case felt personal, not because the kids reminded me of Jackson, but because I recognized the pattern. A failing system. A kid blamed for the failures of adults. Someone being punished because it was easier than addressing the real problem. Sound familiar? I graduated top 10% of my class, passed the bar on my first try, and joined a small firm specializing in juvenile defense. It didn't pay much, but impact? That was priceless. I helped kids who actually needed second chances, kids who didn't have anyone fighting for them, the way 16-year-old me never did. Meanwhile, Jackson? Occasionally, Aunt Julie would mention updates she heard through the family grapevine. Graduated high school. Dropped out of community college. Worked retail. Got promoted. Got demoted. Got fired. It was like watching a slow-motion career car crash. My parents, of course, never stopped coddling him. Never stopped enabling. Never stopped believing he just needed a better opportunity. Funny how opportunities always looked like other people's work and money. I built my own life during those years, my own apartment, my own career, my own friendships, my own stability. And still, not once did my parents reach out to reconcile. Not once did Jackson apologize. Not once did any of them acknowledge what they'd done. It was like they'd written me out of the family's script entirely. And honestly, I was fine with that. Until the universe decided it was time for the plot twist of the decade. One average Tuesday morning, I was at my desk, reviewing a case file for a kid who'd been charged with possession of something his older brother stuffed in his backpack. Classic scapegoat setup, when my secretary buzzed me. "Daniel? You have a walk-in consultation. Name?" I asked, not looking up. She checked the intake sheet. "Janet and David Stevens." I froze. My pen slipped out of my hand. My heart didn't pound. It steadied. Because the kid they'd thrown away at 16? He was about to look them dead in the eye as the attorney they desperately needed. And they had absolutely no idea. They walked into my office looking like life had body-checked them for a decade straight. My mother, once rigid and perfectly composed, had that wilted look people get when they've spent too many nights crying and too many mornings pretending they haven't. My father moved slower, shoulders rounded, like the weight of the world had finally climbed aboard. They didn't recognize me. Not at first. I watched the confusion flicker across their faces as they stepped into the room, like they were expecting some older man in a charcoal suit, not the son they'd shipped off at 16 and never bothered to understand. Then my mother's eyes locked on the nameplate on my desk. Daniel Stevens, ESQ. Her hand flew to her mouth. My father went pale. "Danny?" my mother whispered, voice cracking around the edges. "It's Daniel," I corrected gently, professionally. "Please, have a seat." They sat like people unsure whether the chair might collapse beneath them. I stayed standing a moment, just long enough for the power dynamic to be unmistakable, then took my seat slowly, deliberately, giving nothing away. I folded my hands on the desk. "According to the intake form," I said, "you're here about your son, Jackson." My father swallowed hard. It was the first time I noticed how old he looked when he wasn't trying to seem invincible. "He's been arrested," Dad said quietly. They're saying he embezzled from his job. $45,000. My mother burst into tears. "They want to send him to prison, Daniel, prison. We didn't know where else to go. People told us your firm was the best. We didn't know you worked here." I nodded, calm, controlled. "What are the exact charges? Do they have documentation? Has he spoken to a public defender yet?" The attorney in me took over because that's who I am now, steady, focused, unshakable. But beneath that, there was a cold, clean clarity. They weren't here because they wanted me back. They were here because they needed something. Again. When they finished explaining Jackson's case, I sat back. I should tell you, I said, keeping my tone flat. I specialize in juvenile defense. Jackson is 27. His case is outside my practice area. My mother blanched. My father leaned forward. But you can help? Maybe guide us? You're his brother. The irony almost made me laugh. At 16, I'd been too dangerous to keep at home. At 29, I'd become their lifeline. I can refer you to several excellent attorneys, I said, sliding a pad forward. They'll handle a white-collar case like this far better than I can. My mother looked shattered. But we hoped. She cleared her throat. We hoped you might help him because he's family. Family? That word landed with all the weight of 13 years. I leaned forward just slightly. Mrs. Stevens, I said, because she had not earned Mom. Family doesn't exile a 16-year-old kid without a phone and cut him off from everyone he knows. They both flinched. I continued, steady as a metronome. And family doesn't show up 13 years later only when they need something. My father's face broke in a way I had never seen, not anger, not defensiveness. Shame. Real, painful, human shame. Daniel, he whispered. But I didn't let him finish. The referrals are good attorneys. They'll take care of Jackson. But I won't be involved in this case. Silence stretched across the room like a fault line. My mother finally nodded, tears falling freely. My father bowed his head. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't triumphant. I was simply done being the scapegoat. The child they'd thrown away was gone. In his place sat an attorney they would never truly know. My parents stood slowly, as if the air itself had gotten heavier. My mother smoothed her dress with trembling hands. My father stared at the carpet like he was reading a confession written in the fibers. I could practically see the moment it hit them. They hadn't just lost a son. They'd lost access to the one person who might have saved their golden child, again. They moved toward the door, but my mother paused, turning back as if pulled by some invisible string. Her voice broke on the first word. Daniel, we truly are proud of you. It wasn't a lie. But it wasn't the truth either. It was grief over the version of me they could have had if they hadn't thrown me away. I nodded once, polite, distant. That pride would have meant more 13 years ago. My father flinched like I'd struck him. Not with malice, just precision. He started to speak, but I held up a hand. I don't say that to hurt you. I say it because it's the truth. You can't rewrite the past now that you see the outcome. My mom let out a sound between a sob and a gasp. But we want to fix it, she pleaded. We want to make things right. I let myself smile, not kindly, not cruelly, just honestly. You can't fix something you don't have access to anymore. Silence. My father swallowed hard. Does that mean there's no chance? None at all? I considered my words carefully. You made a decision when I was 16. You decided I was disposable. You decided Jackson's image mattered more than my entire life. You decided I was the problem because you were too afraid to face the truth about him. Their faces collapsed inward. And now, I continued, voice steady, I've built a life without you. A life I'm proud of. A life I don't need to fit you into. My mother covered her mouth as tears spilled over. My father nodded once, slow, resigned. I understand, he whispered. For the first time in my life, I believed him. They left quietly. No yelling. No guilt trips. No denial. Just two people walking out of an office, carrying the weight of consequences they finally couldn't outrun. The door clicked shut. And I sat there, alone in the silence of my own making. Not triumphant. Not angry. Free. The secretary poked her head in a minute later, eyes wide. Was that Were those the parents you told me about? I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Yeah, I said. That was them. She blinked. Wow. They looked like they'd been hit by a bus made of karma. A short, tired laugh escaped me. Pretty much. I turned back to my desk, to my case files, to the life I'd built with my own hands. A life they would never be part of. And for the first time, that didn't sting. It felt right. About 2 weeks after that surreal office encounter, one of the attorneys I'd referred them to called me. Not for advice. For context. Your parents seem overwhelmed, he said carefully. Jackson's case is messy, but manageable. He'll probably get a plea deal if he cooperates. Just thought you should know he's looking at 18 to 24 months. I thanked him, hung up, and went back to work, feeling nothing but a distant, clinical acknowledgement. My brother's life was spiraling, again, and for the first time, I didn't feel responsible. That part of me had died a long time ago in a guest room in Pennsylvania. A week later, a thick envelope arrived at my firm. My mother's handwriting. I almost tossed it. But curiosity won. 4 pages. Handwritten. Apologies, so many apologies, that came 13 years too late. She wrote about denial, about favoritism, about fear of admitting failure as parents. She said Jackson's arrest had finally shattered the illusion that he was just misunderstood. She said they saw now how cruel they'd been to me. How wrong. She said they loved me. That they always had. I put the letter in my desk drawer without finishing the last page. I wasn't angry. I wasn't moved. It was simply irrelevant. 2 weeks later, my secretary buzzed me again. It's your mother. Do you want me to say you're unavailable? I hesitated, 5 seconds, maybe less, then picked up. Daniel Stevens. She exhaled sharply, like she'd braced herself for a hang-up. Daniel. I won't keep you long. I just wanted to tell you that Jackson took the plea. 18 months. I know, I said. He wrote you a letter asking to apologize, but he didn't know how to mail it without overstepping. Don't send it. A beat of silence. Then another. You really won't speak to us? She whispered. I'm not punishing you, I said. I'm protecting myself. We destroyed our relationship with you. Her voice cracked. We know that now. But he's your brother. No. He's a man whose choices finally caught up with him. Her breath hitched. Is there truly no way back? I leaned back in my chair, looking at the framed degree on my wall, the symbol of everything I'd built, while they assumed I was drifting somewhere in obscurity. No, Mrs. Stevens. Not for me. I heard her swallow hard. I'm sorry, she whispered. More than you know. I believe you, I said. But that doesn't change anything. And for the first time, she didn't argue. She just whispered, goodbye, and hung up. The click of the disconnected call echoed in my office. I didn't feel victorious, or vindicated, or vengeful. I just felt whole. Because some doors aren't meant to be reopened. A month later, I won a case for a 16-year-old who'd been blamed for his older brother's crimes. I fought tooth and nail to keep the kid out of adult court, and won. His parents hugged me afterward, crying. You saved our son, his mother said. And as I drove home that night, I realized something. I had become the person I once needed. Not for my family. For myself. Life after that phone call settled into a strange, quiet rhythm. Not peaceful. Not turbulent. Just clarified. It was like someone had finally cleaned the window I'd been looking through my entire life. Everything made sense now. Why I'd been pushed away, dismissed, minimized. It had nothing to do with who I was. And everything to do with who they needed me to be. And I had stopped being useful to their narrative. A few weeks later, my Aunt Julie called, one of the few people whose number I never blocked. She never starts with small talk. I heard about your folks showing up at your office, she said. Your cousin Melissa saw them downtown afterward. Said they looked like ghosts. I imagine they did, I replied. You okay? Yeah, I said, and realized I meant it. I'm really okay. She exhaled with the kind of pride only someone who has seen your worst days is allowed to have. Good. They had no right coming to you like that. No, I agreed. But I'm glad they did. Why? Because now they know, I said simply. They know exactly who I became without them. There was something healing in that. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. Just truth finally hitting its mark. A month later, while preparing motions in a juvenile burglary case, my supervising partner knocked on my door. You free for a sec? Depends, I said. Is it about the Martinez case? Because I swear if the prosecutor tries one more time to. It's not that. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. We want to move you toward taking on adult felony cases. I blinked. That's not my specialty. It should be, he said. You're one of the sharpest litigators we have. And frankly, you've already outgrown the kiddie pool. I laughed at the phrasing, but something in my chest tightened. Outgrown. That word mattered. He continued, We're giving you your first major case next month. A high-profile financial crime. Big stakes. Big media. Big expectations. I frowned. White collar? Yep. Embezzlement case. Your wheelhouse? Not yet. But you can get there. I didn't realize the irony until he slid the file across the table. A familiar surname. Different first name. Not Jackson. But someone who reminded me exactly of him. A Golden Boy employee who'd never been held accountable until the consequences hit like a freight train. I flipped through the file, reading the evidence, the statements, the painfully familiar pattern of choices. My partner watched me closely. You're quiet, he said. Most attorneys would be thrilled. I am, I said. But my voice was softer than usual. Because for the first time in my career, something felt different. This wasn't just another case. It felt like the universe had placed a mirror on my desk. A perfect reflection of everything I escaped. And everything my family never learned. Do you want it? He asked. I closed the file. Looked him dead in the eyes. And said, Yes. Because maybe the final chapter with my family wasn't a courtroom showdown. Maybe it wasn't a confession or a breakdown or an apology. Maybe it was this. Me helping people who fell where Jackson never learned to stand. Me doing the work in the world they never believed I could do. Me becoming the kind of advocate my 16-year-old self needed when he was ostracized, exiled, and erased. Maybe the real ending wasn't about them at all. Maybe it never was. The file sat on my desk long after my partner left, thick, heavy, almost pulsing with déjà vu, same patterns. Same excuses? Same promising young man who'd lost his way. The difference was stark. I wasn't the scapegoat anymore. And this kid wasn't my brother. Still, the similarities itched under my skin. That night, I went home, poured myself a drink, and opened the file again. Page after page of forged invoices, altered spreadsheets, unauthorized transfers. A 2-year breadcrumb trail of increasingly desperate decisions. But tucked near the back of the binder was something I didn't expect. A psychological evaluation. The kid, Ethan, had burned himself to the ground trying to impress a father who never noticed him. Trying to live up to a brother who'd been held above him like a trophy. Trying to be good enough. I sat back. This wasn't Jackson. This wasn't entitlement. This was a kid drowning, and no one had thrown him a rope. And suddenly, everything clicked. My brother wasn't the only possible outcome. My family wasn't the only blueprint. There were endless variations of dysfunction. But also endless opportunities to intervene before a life derailed permanently. Ethan was 23. Young enough that the system could still swallow him whole. Young enough that I might be able to pull him back out. I met him 2 days later. He walked into the conference room with his shoulders curled inward, eyes red like he hadn't slept in weeks. He was polite, soft-spoken, terrified. The opposite of Jackson's defiance. But fear comes in many shapes. "Why did you take my case?" he asked quietly after we'd reviewed the charges. He wasn't being rude. He genuinely wanted to know. And for a moment, I wasn't in a law office. I was 16 again, sitting in Aunt Julie's guest room, staring at blank walls and wondering how a family could choose convenience over a child. I cleared my throat. "Because you remind me of someone I used to know," I said. "Someone nobody stepped up for." He nodded slowly, absorbing that. Then he asked the question that punched me right in the ribs. "Did anyone ever step up for you?" The truth landed in my mouth before I could overthink it. "Yes," I said. "Just not the people you'd expect." He nodded again, this time with something like relief. "Do you think I can come back from this?" I looked him in the eyes. Not as his attorney. As someone who'd lived the fallout of other people's failures. "I wouldn't have taken your case if I didn't," I said. He let out a shaky breath, shoulders loosening for the first time. And in that moment, something inside me settled, quiet and sure. This wasn't about revenge. Or validation. Or proving my parents wrong. This was about rewriting the story. Not for them. For me. For the kid I used to be. For the kids I represent now. For every young person whose future is shaped by the adults who should have protected them, but didn't. Ethan wasn't my brother. But I could be the attorney he needed. The one I once needed. Preparing Ethan's defense took over my life for the next 3 weeks. I wasn't just reading files anymore. I was reading patterns, the kind that thread through families, through childhoods, through years of quiet pressure until someone snaps in the only direction they know how. The prosecution thought they had an easy win. 23-year-old accountant. Forged invoices. Money trail straight to his personal account. But cases are never just facts. They're stories. And this kid's story wasn't greed. It was desperation wearing the mask of competence. I dug deeper. Talked to former coworkers. Old teachers. Neighbors. Anyone who could map the fault lines that led to that moment. He wasn't some mastermind. He was a kid who'd been raised to believe failure was death, and asking for help was worse. Sounded familiar. One night, while prepping cross-examination questions, I got a text from Aunt Julie. "Heard you're taking on big cases now. Proud of you, kiddo. Remember to sleep. Love you?" I stared at the screen longer than I meant to. Because she had been the lighthouse in the darkest year of my life. The first adult who didn't look at me like a problem to be solved or a burden to be managed. I texted back. "Love you too. Thank you for everything." Then I went back to work. The hearing came fast. Courtroom packed. Reporters. The kind of attention I normally avoid. But Ethan sat beside me, small, stiff, terrified, and I felt that protective instinct kick in, the same one I'd never been allowed to show toward Jackson. Opening statements began. The prosecution painted him as a calculated thief. Someone who abused trust. Someone who planned every move. Then it was my turn. I stood. Straightened my jacket. And told the court the truth. Not the excused version. Not the coddled version. The human version. I talked about the documented anxiety. The pressure from a father who valued image over well-being. The brother he'd been compared to since childhood. The job where he worked 60 hours a week to avoid disappointing anyone. And the breaking point, the moment he panicked and made a terrible choice because he genuinely believed the world would end if he admitted he was drowning. I didn't argue that he wasn't guilty. I argued that he wasn't irredeemable. The courtroom shifted. Subtly. But unmistakably. By the end of the hearing, the judge looked at Ethan, not like a criminal, but like a kid who'd finally been seen. She ordered a diversion program instead of prison. Restitution instead of incarceration. Therapy instead of a cell. A real second chance. When the gavel dropped, Ethan let out a shaky sob and buried his face in his hands. His mother hugged me in the hallway outside, crying into my suit jacket. "You saved his life," she whispered. I shook my head. "He saved it by facing the truth. I just handed him the flashlight." She hugged me tighter. "Your parents must be so proud of the man you've become." I didn't flinch this time. Didn't feel that sharp pang of old wounds being poked. I just said, "The people who matter are proud. That's enough." As I walked back to my car, case files under my arm, something finally crystallized inside me. My parents had thrown me away. But life had thrown me forward. And every kid I helped pull out of the fire was another reminder that the boy they abandoned didn't disappear. He became someone impossible to bury. Someone they could never claim credit for. Someone they could never break again. A week after Ethan's hearing, I was back in my office doing paperwork, glamorous, thrilling, soul-stirring attorney tasks like itemizing hours and highlighting deposition transcripts, when my receptionist buzzed me. Her voice was softer than usual. "Daniel, there's someone here asking for you." I sighed, assuming it was a client who'd forgotten their appointment time. "Do they have a name?" A pause. Then, "It's your father." My stomach didn't drop. My chest didn't tighten. There was no earthquake of emotion. Just a quiet, steady exhale. "I'll be out in a minute," I said. I gathered my composure, not because I expected chaos, but because I wanted control to be visible. Palpable. Undeniable. When I stepped into the lobby, he was standing by the window. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, though age had softened the sharpness of him, but smaller in presence. Like life had been chiseling away at him one consequence at a time. His eyes lifted when he heard my footsteps. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then he spoke in a voice that had lost all the authority it once wielded over my childhood. "You look good, son." "Daniel," I corrected gently. "Not son." He swallowed. "Right. Daniel." Another long pause. He wasn't holding himself like a man ready to argue, or guilt trip, or rewrite history. He looked like someone who understood the ground he stood on wasn't his anymore. Finally, he said, "I won't take much of your time. I just needed to thank you." That caught me off guard, not emotionally, but logically. "For what?" I asked. "For the referrals," he said. "The attorney you sent us to, he really fought for Jackson. We didn't deserve that help from you, but you gave it anyway." He looked down at his hands. "We haven't been able to stop thinking about that." I nodded once. "Jackson started his sentence last week," he added quietly. "He's taking it better than we expected. Scared, but maybe it's good for him. I don't know." He looked up again, eyes glassy but steady. "You were right about us," he said. "About how we raised you. About what we did. We told ourselves we were protecting Jackson, but really, we were protecting ourselves. From admitting he needed help we didn't know how to give." I stayed silent. He took a shaky breath. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect a relationship. I don't expect anything." He let the words settle before finishing. "I just wanted you to know, you didn't deserve what happened to you. And you became someone extraordinary anyway." Something shifted in the lobby air, like the weight of his words had their own gravitational pull. But inside me? Nothing cracked. Nothing caved. Nothing reopened. Because healing isn't about their remorse. It's about my peace. "I appreciate you saying that," I said evenly. He nodded, shoulders slumping just enough to show relief. "I won't bother you again," he said softly. "Take care of yourself, Daniel." He turned to leave. Stopped. Then added, barely above a whisper, "You were the best thing we ever had. And we let you walk away." He walked out before I could respond. Not that I would have. I went back to my office, closed the door, and let the silence settle around me like armor. No shaking hands. No racing heart. No tears. Just clarity. My father had finally told the truth. But the truth doesn't erase the past. It just makes the present lighter. And for the first time, I realized something. The story between me and them wasn't about reconciliation. It was about closure. Not theirs. Mine. 3 months after my father's unexpected visit, life had settled into something almost startlingly simple. Work. Dinner with friends. Sundays with Aunt Julie and Uncle Robert. Quiet mornings. Predictable evenings. My world, finally, was mine. Then one morning, my receptionist knocked on my office door with a small envelope. "No sender name," she said. "Just for Daniel written on the front." Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. No letterhead. No dramatic confession. Just Jackson's handwriting, crooked, familiar, unchanged. "I don't deserve forgiveness. I don't expect you to read this. I just want you to know something true." Already, I could feel the weight of the moment, but not the pain of it. That part of me had long healed over. When Mom and Dad blamed you, I didn't speak up. Because silence was easier. Because being the golden child felt good. Because I was a coward. My jaw tightened, not in anger, but recognition. He continued. "Being here, I can't hide from who I became. And I can't hide from what you became. You survived what broke me. You became everything I pretended I would someday be." Asterisk asterisk. A long pause in the writing, ink slightly darker afterward, like he'd left and returned. "I know you won't visit. I know you won't write back. I know we're not family in the way that word should mean. But when I get out, I'm going to build a life without expecting you to fix it. That's the only apology I can offer." At the bottom, one last line. "I hope you keep winning. You deserve it more than anyone I know. Jackson." I sat quietly for a long moment, not grieving, not nostalgic. Just acknowledging. I folded the letter, placed it in a drawer, not the trash, and went back to work. Not because I didn't care, but because caring no longer hurt. That evening, I drove to Aunt Julie and Uncle Robert's house. We ate roasted chicken and vegetables. Julie asked about my cases. Robert teased me about finally needing yard tools for my house. It was the kind of night I used to dream about when I was 16, alone in a stranger's bedroom. When I left, Julie hugged me tight and said in her soft, unwavering way, "We're proud of you, sweetheart." And this time, I didn't think about the people who hadn't said it soon enough, or often enough, or sincerely enough. I only thought, this is what family feels like. As I walked to my car, I realized something with a peace so complete it startled me. My story stopped being about them years ago. It finally became about me. And I won, not by defeating them, but by choosing a life where they could no longer break me.